I'm Kevin Power, and this is SaskScapes, the podcast featuring stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. Welcome to episode 100 of SaskScapes. I cannot believe I finally get a chance to say that sentence. It feels so good to have made it this far in the podcast series. I'm truly baffled. So a few things. First of all, thank you, dear listeners, for, listening. Because let's face it, what would a podcast be if nobody was listening? And you are, and I hear from you within Saskatchewan and around the world. Some of you I've met, and it is such a pleasure to know that you are enjoying listening to the stories of this fabulous province. So thank you for that. Secondly, a big thank you to the nonprofit sector of the arts, culture, and heritage communities of Saskatchewan. Your sponsorship has helped keep this series going. I have loved meeting you. I have loved forging relationships with you and keeping those relationships going. And most importantly, I have loved telling your stories, each and every one of them. So thank you for keeping your support going. I appreciate it greatly. Okay, third thing. SaskScapes is available on every single podcasting app that I can think of, and even some I've never even heard of. So whatever your podcasting app of choice is, you can find SaskScapes there. Or you can just Google the word SaskScapes, and believe me, you'll have so many hits, it'll be impossible to miss the podcast. Or you can do this. Open a web page browser on your device and type SaskScapes.buzzsprout. That's BUZZSPROUT. Or if you're in the States, BUZZSPROUT.com. And once you get to that page, if you look down at the bottom of your device, on the Apple devices, it's that little box with the arrow pointing up from it. If you click on that, it will give you an option to add that page to your home screen of your device. And when you do, voila, you will have a SaskScapes podcast app right on your phone. Easy, simple access to the whole series, which, by the way, is completely free. And finally, there's a new feature to this podcast series. So if you just keep the episode rolling just past the fabulous theme music that is none other than Jeffrey Straker from his Slings and Arrows album, you will hear word from some of the other sponsors that help keep the podcast going. So please take a listen to those. Now, regarding the guest for this episode, all of my guests are such a joy and so willing to share their stories. This guest was a complete and utter diva and had no clue whether they were actually going to pull through at the end of the day and do it. They did, for which I am grateful. It was a lot of arm pulling to make it happen, but they did. So, thanks, guest. You know who you are. All right, enjoy the show. Well, it's a momentous day. It's a momentous episode, milestone episode, and so I am thrilled to have somebody that I've worked with on stage, someone who is extremely involved in the theater scene in Saskatchewan, join me as my guest, and that would be one Mark Claxton, who's the executive director of the Saskatchewan Association of Theatre Professionals and an actor and director in his own right. Hey, Mark, thanks for joining me and thanks for agreeing to be a guest on my podcast.
Kevin, it's a great pleasure. I don't want to derail things early on here, but your introduction there's one little inaccuracy. I feel like it's important to point out right off the top.
I don't think so. I'm pretty good at doing my research, but I'm not adverse to being corrected. So
okay.
Correct away.
Yeah. Well, sure. Yeah. I just think it might be important. I mean, my understanding is that I'm actually not the guest here today, that in fact, the honored guest here today is yourself, sir, for on the occasion of your 100th episode of SaskScapes, which is super cool. Congratulations.
Okay, so I don't usually do guest hosts. This is my podcast series. So are you sure you got that information correct?
Well, if I'm reading the memo properly, then I'm pretty sure this is exactly how it's supposed to roll out. Yeah, also, I happen to know that your life story is far more interesting than mine. So
no, but you see, you don't understand. This podcast series is built on the premise that it's not about me. I let my guests be nervous. I don't want to put myself in the hot seat that way. I mean, I've successfully avoided doing that for 199 episodes now.
Yeah.
Why would I start?
I'm sorry, Kevin, but the jig is up. You need to come out from behind the curtain, and we need to put the host in the spotlight now. I just feel like that's only right. And
I don't want to create a rift between you and I, so. I
put a lot of work into my list of potentially embarrassing questions, so I think you should give me a chance to use them.
Yeah, okay, so that's one of the clever reasons why I never wanted to talk about myself in this series is that I would prefer to have the illusion of being someone who's got it all figured out, and now you're about to pull the curtain back on that. So thanks. We'll call this episode Full Exposure.
Well, Kevin, congratulations. First thing I'm curious about is when I want to talk about the podcast, but then I really am interested in hearing more of your story as a singer and as an actor, as well as a theater professional and musician. But when you began doing SaskScapes, were you seeing 100 episodes in the future? And how's it feeling to be hitting that milestone?
Well, to answer your first question, no way. I thought maybe if I made it to 25, I'd be lucky, but I knew that once I got hooked and I was churning out like sometimes 3 or 4 episodes a week, that it might be possible to exceed 25 and maybe I'd be lucky and get to 30. Never did I think I'd make it to 100. And there were many times during the series where I thought the gig was done and that there would be no more. So, I'm pretty pleased to reach that milestone. What's the second part of your question? I forgot that already.
Yeah, well, I think you've answered it. I guess implied in the question was how does a singer and actor become a podcast producer? Were you a fan of the medium before you began producing podcasts? How did this whole idea come about for you?
Well, I kind of grew up listening to a lot of talk radio. So the talk and long interview format has been something that I've really liked. And if it hasn't been an interview format, I really, really caught on to radio drama, old school radio drama, The Shadow Knows and things like that. And so being the insufferable insomniac that I am, I'd often put these things on at nighttime so that I could fall asleep listening to stories. And I guess that was the genesis of the medium of long form spoken interviews. And then during university, I started to listen to a lot of regular programming from stations sometimes in the States, and they would play literally. I plugged my earbuds in and put them under the pillowcase, and so I was lying on my earbuds, and they would literally play all night. And if I fell asleep and I woke up in the middle of the night, I just rewind them to where I missed, and that went on for most of the years of university. And then fast forward when podcasts became a thing, which was in the early 2000s, I suppose, I caught on to them pretty quickly, and my finger was on that subscribe button pretty much right away when I realized, okay, well, I'm about to have no life now because I couldn't stop subscribing to a series, and it continues to be that way. And the earbuds are still under the pillowcase every single night, and a podcast or two or three or 10 is playing every single night. Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Wow. One of the things that strikes me about the popularity of podcasts is there are often critiques leveled at today's younger generation, quote unquote, lacking attention span because all the devices and all of the screens and the multimedia jungle that is the internet. And yet a podcast requires some sustained attention, right? You've got to stick with something that's only an audible, only an audio stimulus, but they're hugely popular. What is that magic about just having something in your ear with no other help to keep you in the story?
Well, I kind of think it's much like streaming television. If you only have the attention span of a gnat and can only manage to stay focused for 2 minutes, the podcast is still there. And you just have to scrub back on the little scrub button and go back to where you left off. And so it's audio on demand. So I think that's the attraction, is that you can, and if you're not into the conversation that's being had, you just ditch it much like a movie and go on to something else.
Yeah, right. So this is actually rooted in your love of drama and storytelling. Then this isn't maybe as much of it's not really a departure from theater, is it, at all?
I don't think there's been anything that I've done in my career or life that has been a departure from the world of theater and arts. I popped out of my mom's tummy basically ready to go in this genre. So it's all I've ever known. It's all I want to know. I mean, no, that sounds incredibly close-minded of me to other things, but on the level of my life's purpose and the work that I'd like to do, put it this way, I'd be a terrible computer programmer. And so I think the podcast is an extension of that, but it also requires a different skill set. And as I said earlier, it's a chance for me to listen more than talk. And then there's the whole technology behind how to make them happen to begin with. And every episode presents its own challenges and its own nightmares. So yeah, there's been a technical learning curve and a skill, but you're right. It's still an extension of everything I've ever done. I mean, that's what we do as actors, right? We bring to life the stories found on the pages of a script. That's what we do.
Yeah. You you chose as your focus stories about culture and art and heritage in Saskatchewan. And 100 episodes in, probably no foreseeable end to those stories. What kind of experience has it been to delve into this province in that kind of a way?
Yeah, it's incredibly self-indulgent in one way, I have to say, because I for the first For the first couple of years, at least, I got to choose the stories that I wanted to tell, and I would source out and talk to, heads of communities and find out who in their community have interesting stories to tell, and I got to really pick and choose, and I chose often if I felt that I could bring something to the table, not as far as participating in the conversation, and as much as be enthusiastic about the topic and about what the guest has done, that I could be articulate as a host and keep a 1 hour episode spinning. So that has been the great luxury. And I mean, I got to tell you, for the first few years, because this is the way that I operate, I'm not a particularly small chat kind of person. I tend to chat deep, as they say, and I kept making guests cry, and I'm sort of becoming the Barbara Walters of the SaskScapes podcast. And it wasn't anything I was purposely doing. I just somehow we tapped into, because really the world of culture and heritage and who people are and their history and their background and their family story and how it informs them sort of can touch on some pretty raw nerves sometimes. And so yeah, I mean, it was a privilege, and continues to be a privilege to be sort of let in on people's lives that way.
Huh. Yeah, well, I feel now like the gauntlet has been thrown, and I somehow need to make you cry before the end of this episode, Kevin, or otherwise I'm not matching your standards as a host.
Yeah, but see, there's never the intention; it just kept happening.
Yeah, it's a lot. I've heard curiosity as a key, such an essential quality to an artist, for one thing, right? A genuine curiosity about people, about the world, and that must have stood you in good stead as well in working on this series, right? A genuine interest in people and their stories.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love about being on stage or on set is if the chemistry's right, which it often is. The talk in the green room has never been particularly shallow. I can't think of when it was about the weather. I can't think of when it was about the weather. I've been through the gamut of emotions myself and with fellow actors. You get deep really quickly, and that's just sort of part of the bonding experience, I think. But that's one of the things I love about that life. And we tend to give a lot of ourselves to each other when we're working together, and that's really what I love about that life. And so that kind of informs the way I ask questions. Is that I'm looking beneath the surface. I'm looking at what the person isn't telling me as the next question. And what I love is that I'll often hear from guests and they'll say, I've never been asked those kinds of questions before, which is great, because that's my living fear, is that if it's somebody that's done some major accomplishment, that I'm going to ask all the questions they've been asked a million times before.
Right.
So yeah, going deep is really what informs the questions that I ask.
That's great. It's always been my experience, and it's a bit ironic, but I found that since in my life I started spending a lot of time around theater people, for all of the sometimes the reputation for being phony or artificial, I've found for the most part they're some of the most authentic people I've ever had the pleasure of being around. Because there seems to be a clear understanding of, okay, I'm on a stage now, I'm pretending, but now I'm not, right?
Yeah, I think most people in general, certainly most actors, can see through somebody playing a part of off stage of who they feel will be most liked, to compensate for insecurities. And I'm like that person's worst nightmare, because I really tend to be incredibly intuitive, And having gone down that path myself, I think that's probably why I see it. And I go, okay, well, I have to find out why this person feels that they need to be the way they are. And I'll get to the bottom of it. But, I've never really been a huge fan of that cliche that actors are just people that are starved for attention or didn't get their needs met. I find that incredibly cliche.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a real shallow, I think, ill-informed idea of what brings people into the theater, into the work of performing. So can we talk a bit? I want to hear about your story, Kevin, about your story as an artist. I have to note, first of all, that you and I have kind of been traveling in the same direction. I, like you, was born in the Maritimes. You Nova Scotia, correct?
Yeah.
I was born in Fredericton, New Brunswick, although I didn't stay there long. But we have both steadily moved westward, I think, as our lives have progressed. So maybe a few years from now, we will both be in Japan doing another podcast.
I don't see that happening, but
no,
one never knows.
You shouldn't have said that. Yeah. Now it's bound to.
Right.
So. Today you're in Saskatchewan, but you started out in Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. And how early on, when did it become apparent in your heart that you wanted to perform, you wanted to sing and act?
When wasn't apparent is more precisely the question. I honestly don't know. From I have vivid memories from the age of 6 and 7 and up putting on shows in the living room and forcing my parents and friends that they have come over watching. I embarrassingly, this is burnt in my brain as some childhood trauma, I'm sure, but once I found out about, the world of dance, and I'm not a dancer, but I was very, very young. And I remember putting on these white Stanfield long underwear, thinking they were like tights. And I just started doing this dancing around the room and made everybody watch. And so I would often do that. And then what really happened was I discovered the world of puppetry, and that became an obsession. Me, obsession. I mean, my father, bless his heart, I had him building stages. And when The Sound of Music came out in that number with Lonely Goatherd, and I saw what a puppet stage could be, and they had backdrops that were dropping in sync.
Oh my goodness! Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and right on the button, a new backdrop would fall, and they were standing up behind it, and I went, "Oh, I'm thinking too small. I need a stage. I'm talking. I need a ladder to climb up behind." Well, I didn't get quite that far, but Dad really did try to humor me, and I had a brother who spent a weekend, who's a sculptor, who spent a weekend making a marionette for me, about a 3-foot tall marionette. And puppetry became a huge obsession to me. And then I started to, discovering things like shadow puppetry. And I would get books out of the library as a kid and follow the designs and try to make the classic shadow puppets that are often used in telling legends. And that, it just consumed me. So, and that was before the age of 10. So I really didn't stand much of a chance of doing anything else, and I don't think I really wanted to.
And your parents throughout this, they were supportive as you continued to pursue the direction of performance?
Always. I'm the youngest of 7, and come from a family that has a very noticeable creative streak, not always professionally, but have been involved in the arts in some level. So, yeah, and my mom went to art school during the war, and her cousin, my second cousin, was a famous singer during World War II who sang with some of the big bands of the area and recorded live for Radio Luxembourg and recorded did one of the first recordings of Richard Rogers' Blue Moon. That was one of her signature pieces, and I had her 8x10. I still have it, and I just idolized her. And Mom played Broadway music. I remember her playing musicals while she was giving me a bath as a kid. So I must have been, I'm sure, 20 or 25. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I got a whole new list of questions now.
Highly inappropriate. No, in all seriousness, though, Mom did, often if she wasn't playing them, she was singing them. So those are pretty early years. And I've never done anything sort of half-assed, which is either an addictive personality quality, I don't know, but, like she'd play the musical for me, and then, well, as any normal person would do, you literally have to go and memorize the entire musical and all of the parts, which fast forward will work in my favor, actually, later on in my career. But so I would I literally still know the entire score to Fiddler on the Roof and can sing it from beginning to end. And The Sound of Music I became obsessed with. I would put on, you're probably too young to remember 45 records, although maybe they've come back. But
I remember them, Kevin. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I owned a few.
I just figure everybody's like much younger than I am. So I had Disney came out with these 45 records when I was a kid of, just one side would be one song, and the other side would be another song from musicals. So I remember I had Mary Poppins, and it actually wasn't Julie Andrews singing. It was a singer named Marnie Nixon, who was often used. And she had, that's a whole other story in and of itself. But anyway, she sounded very much like Julie Andrews, and no doubt she was a lot cheaper to use to do the recording. So I would obsess and listen to these things. I just play it over and over and over and over again, and I had to mimic absolutely everything, right down. Of course, this was before my voice changed. Everything that I was exposed to, I had to just do, 200% of. I just couldn't dabble in any of it. So I'm hopeless. What can I say? I seem to have no choice.
This is making me want to ask what your experience of school was, or perhaps what were your teachers' experiences of you?
Yeah, well, my experiences with school were dreadful. They were a nightmare. I grew up in a very small town in Nova Scotia. There were no arts programs whatsoever. I was an outsider. I was teased mercilessly for it. When word got out that I wanted to learn how to play the piano, and somebody was willing to let me use the elementary school piano, and a teacher came in from Halifax to give me lessons. Well, that just screamed, beat the crap out of me, please. And I was just the brunt of every possible joke, except for 1 year. And that year had a major, major impact on my life. And that was grade 4, when a teacher came to the town where I grew up, Lakeside, and taught my grade 4 class. And I grew up right on the border of predominantly, an all-black district of Halifax County and all white. So the school was mixed. So she was black. She was from Jamaica. She had an amazing quality about her, and she had a real creative way she moved through life. And I remember she would read us a chapter from C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia. And I'm still obsessed with that story, the whole series. And she created the first school newspaper, and I got to design the first cover, and I wrote articles for it. And I remember a day when she was leading a sing-along, and she said, I'm going to have Kevin come up and stand and lead the singing because he really is the best singer in the class. And I think she identified early on that I was going to have a challenge in school. And so she chose to celebrate me. And there's a reason why I know this to be true. And that reason is because when I was on the road with Phantom on one of the hiatuses, I went back to my hometown to just revisit the schoolyard where I was beat up so much and just kind of, do some kind of woo-woo spiritual process, I guess, by which I would remind myself that I'm no longer that kid and I've got my own back. And I thought, gee, I wonder if Miss Kelson still lives out here. So I asked around, and sure enough, she was still in the same house that I knew that she was in. So I went to the door and I knocked on the door, and she came to the door, and I said, Miss Kelson, do you have any idea who I am? And she looked at me and she paused for a minute and she said, I do. She said, you're Kevin Power. Now, how she knew this, because she hadn't seen any pictures of me. My mom and dad had moved out west long before that. So it's not like she had been seeing pictures of me. And I said, I can't believe you know that. She said, please come in. And we sat down at a table and she put the kettle on. And I took her by the hand and I said, I just want to thank you so much because I felt like you knew that I was going to have a challenge in school, and somehow I felt like I was being looked after. And she said, I did. I knew that you were a special kid and that you were going to have a rough time in this area. And you obviously had so much creativity about you, and I just wanted to make sure that I protected that as much as I could for that year. And then the back door of her house opened, and this woman walked in, and she said, oh, Kevin, I'd like to introduce you to my partner, Vicky. Well, then the tears started flowing because she knew even then that I was and continue to be, as it happens. I haven't given it up, be gay, and she knew that. So she also knew that I was going to take a real rough ride down that route, and she was right. And so a year later, she was coming to Montreal with Vicky, and didn't we happen to be in Montreal with the show for a half a year at Place des Arts? And I had told the cast this entire story, and I brought them as guests to Phantom, and they sat right in the expensive seats under the chandelier. And then I brought them backstage afterwards, and the entire cast assembled, and I introduced them to everybody. And I bought the entire series, the C.S. Lewis Chronicles of Narnia series, and she wrote it in the cover of the first one, which I still have. And it was just magical.
Oh, my goodness.
Several years later, I came home to visit Mom and Dad in Saskatoon. I was living in Toronto, where I have been living most of my adult life. And they said, well, you should run downstairs and wash your hands and get ready for lunch. And I came back up, and there standing in the living room is Miss Kelson and Vicky. Turns out Vicky had relatives in Saskatchewan, and they had surprised me.
Oh, my goodness.
And then in 2003, I produced my own touring show, and we went to the Maritimes, and we did a show in Dartmouth, and Miss Kelson came to that and sat in the front row. By then, she had gray hair, and I had to tell half of the story I'm telling now to the audience sitting there. And, of course, then I burst into tears, and I just thought, she's still part of my life these many years later. So So you asked me how school was for me and how that was the year that made it. The rest of it was a living nightmare, and thank God I had that 1 year.
That is, yeah. So I wasn't supposed to be the one with the tears in my eyes, I think, by the end of the conversation, but that's the way it's going. That's an amazing story, Kevin. That's an amazing. It occurs to me how destiny is shaped in these little moments, right? Like, had you not gone to her, taken the effort to go to her house that day and look her up and tell her thank you.
Yep.
That suddenly this incredible lifelong friendship came out of that. What was already a formative relationship became and I think about the teachers that have made an enormous difference for me that I never have gone back and thanked, that's.
Yeah, I've sort of made a point, because you're right. Life can be a series of blissful and unpredictable yet fortunate experiences that when you look back in hindsight, you think it looks all so planned out, but none of it always was a big question mark. And so now at this stage of my life, I find myself contacting a lot of people who were really, really key to moving me forward and thanking them for what they gave me, and I think that's really important, because unless you were born just friggin' lucky and everything fell into your lap, most of us are a compilation of fortuitous circumstances of being in the right place at the right time and meeting the right people. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, if you can, to those people directly, but certainly acknowledge it. It's so hard to find things to be grateful for in life, sometimes, I find, and that's one way you can, is to think none of this would have happened without that person and that person and that person. And so she was just one of many that I've had the opportunity to thank, not in such a grandiose way as that.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's really, really important to thank those people. And it can be any walk of life. I don't mean to make this exclusive to theater. I think anybody has an opportunity to encounter people that will really have a major impact on who they are.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And what a profound reminder that we sometimes have no idea what our, the impact of that we, with a kind gesture or some kind words, we just don't know the difference it could make in another young career, right? You've done a lot of adjudicating with young music students and singers and performers, and is the impact that your teacher made for you, is that always to some extent present in how you engage with students?
It's 100% the reason why I do it. I do it because of what Miss Kelson gave me that other teachers didn't. When I think of my life and my career, I am a series of people having told me, mostly, you can't, you'll never. And it has been my mission to go to say to myself, I'll show you. And so my sole mission in adjudicating is to make sure that I can do my part to not make one kid or young adult experience that, if only for one moment. And so in that moment of adjudicating, I'm become a compilation of all of those people in my life. And even when I'm seeing somebody who just isn't gifted, because let's face it, we all don't get the gifts we want. Otherwise, I would be able to draw like some of my brothers and my mother, and I can barely draw a stick man. That just wasn't the gift I was given. And so I have no idea. And sometimes, they are completely tone deaf. My goal is to sit there and look at them and be an observer. And if I need to find at least one thing that I can say that goes along the lines of, you know what I love about you is that you're ... And every single person I adjudicate, I try to bring that to the table because I don't want to be one of those people that forces them, no matter what they do in life, to walk away going, I'm going to show you. Because I had too many people like that in my life.
Yeah. And what do you say to the school of thought? I've heard in opposition to that occasionally, the school of thought, well, somebody's got to tell them that they just don't have it. Otherwise, they're just going to waste their life and waste their time on something that isn't really a strength for them.
Yeah, no, you're right. They do. And I have never been one that's bought into the line of you can do anything you put your mind to. Because let's face it, we can't. I'm never going to be a skydiver, no matter how much I put my mind to it. I wanted to be a figure skater. I think you kind of have to know how to stop, and all I know how to do is slam into the boards. It's not my gift. So if you can see it, you can be it. I just don't buy that. And you're right. I'm also not an advocate of leave no child behind, tell everybody they're fantastic, that they never know that they can fail. But, I'm just helicoptering in for one moment. I'm not in these people's lives on a daily basis. I'm not their teacher. So it's not my place in an adjudicating session to go, you don't have what it takes, kid. Get off the stage. Because you know what? I look at it this way. Even the most talented person who gets up there who blows me away, and there have been many where I've had to get up and leave the room so I can bawl my eyes out for a minute and then come back and adjudicate them. I have no idea whether that person's going to have a career or not, because I've seen so many people like that who have never worked on stage at all and are still waiting tables. And I've seen people that I just think, how in the world did you even earn? Who got you up here on this stage? And when your talent shows up, let me know. So there's no predictor as to whether the great person's going to work and the not great person isn't going to work. So it's not my place in that moment that I'm going to see them for a couple of days to make or break the dreams. I just figure the best you can do is to say, look, this may not be. I will often say, I think there are stronger choices you can make than the ones that you're making. And that's the privilege of being in theater, is we get to play and discard the ones that work and go for the ones that seem to be stronger. And that's my job, is to be an observer and to let you know what I think is working in your favor. And those kind of skills, I think, will stand that person in good stead no matter what they do. If I can at least eke out someone who's able to be articulate and stand confidently in front of people, whether it's in a boardroom where they're making a financial presentation or whatever, then I've done something. It's all about confidence. But I mean, of course, you're right. Eventually you have to tell some people it's just not your thing.
Yeah. So you, at some point, your family packed up and moved west, correct? And at what point in your life did that happen? And what was the impetus for that?
I came first.
Okay.
Well, we had all been sort of dispersed. Many of my siblings were out west, and they had sort of found their way to Saskatchewan. And it's funny, I guess it's human nature, but that there's got to be any place is better than here kind of mentality that I was getting into. And now, of course, all I want to do is go back. But I just thought any place is better than Halifax. And so I did a year at Dalhousie University, and then I wanted to come out here because I knew that at least I would have a place to live. My parents were still living in Lakeside. And so I thought, okay, well, I really want to go into music. I had done 1 year of sort of arts courses. I had gone to meet the head of the music department and told him my intention. He said, well, have you studied it all? And I said, no. And he said, do you read music? And I said, no. He said, have you taken piano lessons? And I said, no. And he said, well, this is what you need to get into a music department, but why do you take some music history courses and some music appreciation courses? And so, of course, what did I do? I did that. And then that summer, I devoured all of the Toronto Conservatory theory books and learned how to read music. And so that I was ready to do that. And there was an arts program in my junior high school for a brief moment in time. I think she must have donated her time. I don't think the school ever paid her, but ukulele and recorder was a huge thing in the Maritimes. Chalmers Doane was on the leading. He was on the forefront of the ukulele movement. The ukulele is really, really hip now, but back then it was like it was like getting the Olympics if you could get into the Chalmers Doane a ukulele group, and also the recorder group. So she was part of that when she was a kid, and she came out to teach us. And so I had played recorder for a while, and I thought, well, what's the instrument I'm going to go into at the University of Saskatchewan? And it didn't occur to me that it was going to be voice. I mean, I'd sung all the time, but mostly church music. So I decided that maybe there would be a recorder program there. And of course, there wasn't. And I contacted the department head, who at the time was Dave Kaplan. And he was a huge advocate for world instruments, and there's a whole other story behind that, but he found what I wanted to do really, really unique. So he said, you put together an audition tape for me and send it. And he said, if you get accepted, I'll create a recorder program for you. And he did. And so I came out here. I was still only 17, and I started my first year of university as a recorder major. And I chose voice as my minor. And then I had to do a little minor voice recital in my second year. Somebody came up to me and said, why are you in recorder? And I said, why? And they said, you should be majoring in voice. And I said, really? And they said, yeah. And I thought, but I just thought it was so unique that I'll play recorder. And they said, well, maybe check out how many professional recorder players there are in the planet. There's not a whole lot. So I did. I changed my major. And they wouldn't put me in the performance program because they felt I wasn't performance stuff. So I went into the degree program in the theory and composition program, which is ironic considering that I had never learned, that I taught myself how to read music. And I came out actually winning in a composition scholarship at the end of university. So, and I'm glad that I did that, because the performing, for me, a successful performing degree is, did you get the job or not? So I don't think you have to do one. So I was grateful to have that theory composition background. But yeah, that was built on people saying you'll never be able to do that, so we won't put you in performance program. They'll put you in theory and composition. And I had many professors say, it's very sweet what you're doing, but you look terrible up there. I just have to say, I hope you find your niche, but this won't be it.
Wow.
Yep. And then that was I'll show you a moment.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the timeline of how that went. And by a couple of years into that, my parents had moved out here. And then I graduated in 85, and the phone rang for my first professional contract in Montreal without me having even applied for it 5 months later. I don't understand how this all played out, but it.
How did the Montreal contract happen, and what was it? What was the gig?
Well, I was also a big choral geek, and I had been involved in a lot of choirs growing up. And I was part of the Greystone Singers, which is a big deal at the University of Saskatchewan. And I guess I was aware at the time that there were 3 professional choirs in Canada, the Tudor Singers of Montreal, the Elmer Eisler Singers, and the Vancouver Chamber Singers. And I had no idea, but there was a big turnover in the singers, of which there are only 20, in the Tudor Singers of Montreal. And the founding director, Wayne Riddle, called Bob Solem, who was a professor at the university at the time and the conductor of Greystone Singers, and said, do you have any singers who have graduated that I think would be good? And he recommended me, which blew me out of the water, because I never even got a solo in Greystone Singers. And so the phone rang, and there was this voice that said, hi, Is this Kevin? And I said, yes. Hi, this is Wayne Riddle calling from Montreal. Very flamboyant speaker. And I thought, okay, am I supposed to know who you are? Bob Solom recommended to you to me, and I'm holding auditions in Montreal. And I'm going to bring you to Montreal to audition for the Tudor Singers. And can you be on a train next week? And
oh my gosh!
I was like, okay, I get yes. And then I think this is serious. So yeah, a very, very long story of travel. But yeah, essentially I went there, I sang for him for about 5 minutes, said, okay, well, you're going to meet up with so-and-so and you'll sign the contract here and here. And then you'll be back in 3 weeks to start. And then I had to move to Montreal. And I graduated in June, and that was September of 85. And then I got there and the phone rang one day and they said, we'd like to have you become part of the ensemble, the Montreal Opera Ensemble. And I said, okay, well, I will think about it. And somebody said, you told them you think about it? Are you kidding? So that was 2 jobs. And so It was all choir and all opera all the time. No theater, just choir and opera. And we toured Nova Scotia, and I got to go back home then and sing on the very stage at Dalhousie University where I know, like, right? So you go...
Amazing.
Yeah, so you go, okay, well, somehow this happened. Yeah, so full circle again. Yeah, and that's how...
So this, after spending your entire university career being told you would not perform, that's all that you did as soon as you were done.
Yeah, and I was they were really kind of grooming me to be in the world of opera. And I was about 95 pounds heavier than I am now, and it all sort of made sense. And one day I just thought, I don't love this enough. I've always just wanted to do musical theater. That's all I ever want to do is musical theater. So in 1987, I got accepted in the Banff School of Fine Arts, which had a program which sadly no longer exists anymore, which was sort of like FAME, the original FAME. In 1 year, you learned everything. And that became 4 years of my life. And that's when I kind of jumped ship and started to get into, that was modern opera actually, but it got me on the road to musical theater. Being in Banff, a director came backstage after I was premiering a 3-hander there and waited for me and said, hello, I'm the director of Alberta Theatre Projects. My name is Michael Dobbin, and I'd like you to come to Calgary and be part of the cast of Candide. And I said, okay, well, I'll think on that. And one of the instructors at Banff said, you said what? And so I said, should I? He said, it's not even a question. So I went up to Calgary. And so I'm sitting there talking to Michael Dobbin, and he's got the contract prepared. And I said, I'll never forget this. I said, so somebody told me that I should ask for my equity card. And he laughed his head off and he said, you've got some nerve. Because, of course, you don't just get an equity card. You have to do an apprenticeship. And he said, okay, fine, I'll buy your permits out and get your equity card. So I didn't even have to apprentice. He just bought my equity card right off the top.
Wow.
And so I didn't really know that wasn't done. And so I said, okay, I guess this is happening. And then in the middle of that, an opportunity to audition for Phantom came up, and I went up to Edmonton to audition and flew to Toronto at my own expense and didn't get it and flew back with my tail between my legs. And then they asked for me to come back. And I was given 72 hours to go to Toronto and do the audition and come back. And I did. And the second time around, it was the entire crew and Cameron McIntosh and Garth Dubinsky and everybody. And I thought, I'm not going to waste this on being nervous again. So I walked out on stage. It's just like in the chorus line, audience is dead black. You can hear these voices, but you don't know who's out there. And I hear this, how was your flight, Kevin? And I said, bloody expensive. I better get it this time. And I realized that the key really is sometimes to just not look like you need the gig.
Yeah.
And so I had the gig. So before I finished Phantom, before I finished Candide, I already had a 2-year phantom contract signed, which would ultimately turn out to be 5.
Wow.
And I just thought that's the way it went. You signed a 2-year contract for theater. And so I got paid stupid amounts of money for 2 years, and then it wound up being 5. And again, I just thought that's what you do.
Right.
So
Right.
that world of, 4-week rehearsals and 2-week performances that most of the world runs on with summer stock and stuff like that. I didn't know anything about that until after. So, I kind of did it the wrong way around. So it was riches to rags rather than rags to riches. But again, it just happened to be the right place at the right time.
Oh, wow. The 4-week rehearsal, 2-week run is the only world I've known, and often have had conversations with fellow actors marveling at those who do a show that goes on literally for years, and being baffled at where you find the stamina and where you find the ability to stay interested in the work. Is that a real challenge? How was that odyssey for you doing Phantom for 5 years?
Well, there's tremendous stamina in a regular paycheck.
Right.
That's for sure. I mean, as a friend of mine says, the business of business is business, and it is a business after all. So there's some stamina there. But, I think I adopted early on the mentality that it's a privilege to have this opportunity to actually work. And I guess that was born out of all the naysayers. And I just thought, I'm not going to squander this opportunity, even if it's the same show 8 times a week. How lucky an opportunity is this? So I never really took it for granted. And sure, there are some days it's tough to pull off tough to pull off 2 Phantoms or 2 Les Mises in a day on a matinee.
Yeah.
I mean, it sucks all the energy out of you. But if you have to come home at the end of the night exhausted, I'd rather it be doing that than something that I don't love. And, I think there's something to be said. Of course, there's something to be said for the variety of the 4-week rehearsal, 2-week performance, and then you move on to another project, and that project gives you a whole new world of experiences. And yeah, there's something to be said about growing that way as well. And sure, there could be the point made that you're really stagnant doing the same role, cookie cutter, musical theater, McDonald's patterned theater. Exactly the same thing everywhere in the world. But there always is room for interpretation in anything, and there always is an opportunity to bring something without deviating from the map of the way the show runs. So I never felt like I was really limiting or stunting my growth as an actor. Doing that. So there are, and look, there's uncertainty in the ups and downs in that 4-week, 2-week situation, because they don't happen back to back. And in between, you're left with the questions of how am I going to survive?
Right.
And many people don't survive. They can't sustain that kind of life, and they make different life choices. So both ways of life have a challenges. And I guess in one way you grow weary of doing the same role every night. Although I didn't, I was a swing. So I was responsible for covering 7 roles. Because
perfect.
Limit yourself to 1 when you can do 7, right?
That's right.
There's that excess part of me again. And there's something to be said for being exhausted doing that. And there's something to be said for being exhausted going, I just don't know how many more times I can come out of a 6-week experience going, what's next? I have no idea what's next. And that could be just as soul sucking. So there really is no right or wrong. It's just a choice you make. And then the ultimate choice becomes how long can you stay in it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really astute point. Exhaustion is a thing for all of us. And, is the exhaustion the price of something that you believe in, and is it worth doing, or is it just a symptom of a need for change. There's nothing wrong with being exhausted, but are you also fulfilled and enjoying what you're doing?
Yeah, I think the minute you stop being fulfilled, you're screwed.
Yeah.
I remember a figure skater saying once they were asked, "What's your advice to young figure skaters?" And they said, "If there's anything else you'd rather do, do that."
Yeah.
Because if you're distracted by the possibility of other things you'd like to do, you might as well go there, because it's the single-minded focus and sheer determination that keeps people in this game at the most difficult of moments. And I've had a lot of colleagues that are really talented, make different choices, and eventually they've moved on. They have families, they have children, and houses, and still do interesting things in their life, but they were ready to get off the stage. And I have tremendous admiration for that. And for some reason, I don't seem to be able to let that go. Can't seem to let it go. It feels like I should, but I still feel like in many ways I'm fighting the you'll never do voices. And also there's just this pattern of dumb luck that somehow seems to show up in the most unlikeliest of times and unlikeliest of ways. And I'm still hedging my bets on that. And I can't seem to stop. I can't get off the wheel, Mark. I need an intervention. I can't stop.
You're not going to get any help from me, I'm afraid. Yeah. So you ended up doing Phantom. That became 5 years. I want to make sure we have time to talk a bit about life for you since you came back to Saskatchewan. But before we get there, were there other? How long did you sort of reside or stay in central Canada? Doing work in different parts of the country. How long before you ended up back on the prairies?
26 years in total. At one point, I had a place both in Toronto and in Vancouver, I was always based in Toronto, but I got my flat in Toronto and then actually didn't move into it until 6 months later after my first hiatus. But it fell into my lap. A fellow actor was moving, and it was a fantastically stunning place, and I had the opportunity to take over the lease, so I did. But I was based out of there.
When did you come back?
I came back. Well, my original intention was just to do a stopover and then move on to Vancouver. It just so happened that when I got here, within the first few weeks of my being here, my dad started to show signs of dementia, and it was rapid how it took him over, and it was just my mom here, and I needed to stay to help. I wanted to stay and help, and that became my all-consuming life for the first 3 years of my being back here. And I did get a chance to get away to do a few stage shows. Again, never in Saskatoon. But I had to set up home care and all kinds of stuff to be able to make that happen. But they were far and few between. There was a movie which was like a 9-month stretch, but that was after Dad had passed. But yeah, that sort of became my life, and so my own career got very much put on hold, and there certainly wasn't the opportunity to get on a plane and go and do any auditions anywhere because it just wasn't realistic to accept it. But I have to say that it's probably the most important work I did in my life, looking after my dad, and I would not pass that opportunity up again, because it's a chance to get out of one's own selfish need to perform and care for somebody else, and that someone else be your father. And the relationships that I forged with my father during that time was more significant than the relationship I had with him from birth up until then. And to have the bittersweet experience of being by your dad's side when he passes is one that can't quite be put into words. It's both tragic and beautiful. And I think I would have been a lesser person had I been denied that opportunity. And I wouldn't have known what that opportunity felt like. So there was clearly a purpose, that which I had no idea about, that was about to happen with me coming back to Saskatchewan. And so the podcast was a lucky break, because that became my ability to scratch that creative itch, was that I could do the podcasting. So I found some artistic outlet that way. So that's why that experience remains so special for me. It's because it's been a lifeline for me in many ways. But so, and then of course, the week I got back here, the Saskatchewan government, he says sarcastically, abolished the film and television tax credit. And so the film industry dried up in this province, and I had begun to do a lot more film and television, even though people said you'll never do film and television. I'll show you. And so there was nothing happened. So I used to joke and say I came back to Saskatchewan to commit career suicide, but was lucky enough that this woman named Trudy Moffat from Montreal, from Toronto, who had a company called Diversified Theatre, started the first and only professional panto in Western Canada in Moose Jaw. And so I did the second one of those, and then did 4 more after that. And the last one that I did happened to be the one where I met one Mark Claxton. And that was the Wizard of Oz.
And I got to say, Kevin, you were a magnificent Wicked Witch of the West, and I say that in full sincerity. I can understand why you were getting hired, sir. You got a enormous and compelling presence. It was really fun working with you.
Don't be green with envy.
Oh my God. You can do corny puns on this podcast? I wish I'd known that. I would have started an hour ago.
There are no rules. Well, thank you. I mean, that's the one thing the panto. Yeah, I've never performed in drag so much in my life. And I get a lot of I don't want to say drag, because the movie that I did most recently was a gender confused person who dressed as female. And I get a lot of, I play nothing but evil. That's all I ever do, which I love. It's great therapy and much cheaper. But it's weird. I either play, I'm either the Wicked Witch, or I'm the Ebenezer Scrooge, or the Fagin type, or I'm in a dress and a fabulous push-up bra and a wig, and because I guess I have this androgynous thing happening as well, and so it's weird. So the panto, just because of panto, you always have 2 characters that are male that appear as female. That's part of the game. So I think I only did I think I did 2 male roles and 3 female roles in those pantos. So thanks. It's always fun to put on a pair of heels and do your thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And has that been primarily, you did the podcast, you did the pantos. Has there been any other Saskatchewan theatrical work in your recent past or coming up? Or
no, I went to do a couple of shows in Alberta, and then the movie that I did most recently was in Winnipeg, and from there I had auditioned for many months before that. I had auditioned for Fagin and Oliver in a production in New Brunswick, actually, at the in Moncton at the Capitol Theatre there. And the person that they had hired got sick and had to leave. And so they called me while I was on set and asked if I could do that show, which was already in rehearsals, and which would be 3 months. And I said, it just happened to sync up with the time I was wrapping. So I flew directly from there to do Oliver for 3 months, and then I literally turned around and 1 week later was in Moose Jaw doing The Wizard of Oz. So you got me. You got me at the end of nearly a 9-month stint. So yeah, I just seem to be destined to be on the road. It just seems to be my thing.
Well, I feel like this, and probably many places have a proven history of being better at exporting talent than holding on to it. You know, I think there's a lot of complex reasons for that as well. But
yeah, I think you're right. I think there's always been sort of a bit of an inferiority complex within some of the casting of shows in Canada. That I mean, I know certainly for the big shows, the blockbuster shows, they would often bring in American talent. And there were people in Canada that were quite capable of doing that, but I think somehow audiences were more impressed. I think sometimes Canadian audiences, even on a local basis, are more impressed when somebody's being brought in.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a big deal. They're coming in from. So I always find it funny when you train here and then you go away and you get more work if you stay away than coming back. I do sometimes think that we're attracted to shows where people are being brought in. And that ought not to be the case. And I think as casting gets a second look now with diversity casting in theater companies, I hope that issue also gets addressed, that we need to continue to foster our homegrown talent. It's all well and fine to create your own projects, but that comes with their own challenges. And sometimes you want to do it because nobody else is going to do those projects. But sometimes you just want to hitch your wagon to something that's already ready to roll, and sign a contract and do the gig. And sometimes you just want that to happen. So we'll see.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll see.
You spoke about your time with your father and what a powerful time that was for you. And do you see that being a part of your work as a performer going forward? That whole experience, that whole journey.
Well, I don't think there's any of my experiences that haven't informed my journey somehow. Yeah, certainly it ups the level of sensitivity and appreciation for things that I've taken sometimes for granted. It's increased my awareness that we are fragile human beings, and life ought not to be taken for granted. It just sort of reinforced just how important a role my parents have played in my life, because I just sort of, I toss off those stories about the puppet theaters and indulging me while I prance around the living room in tights and stuff like that. And they didn't need to do that. I mean, Dad worked as a firefighter, and he worked part-time at Sears in the warehouse there. And, he hadn't come from an artistic background. And I'm wondering if sometimes there's a part of him that thought, oh, if I wound up with all these artistic kids. But it turns out he was a very good artist, and I've come across some of the things that he's done. But he just always had this sensitivity to him. I just think he's just always wanted his kids to be the best versions of themselves. And he offered some of my siblings to he would pay for them to go to conservatory if they wanted to. They wanted a faster route than that. So he was open to it. And I just think over time, those just sort of became stories that I told, and I never really, really kind of took them in and went, wow, not everybody gets parents like this. So the last words my dad said, because he had his health declined and he had a hole in his esophagus, which then ultimately prompted him to go to the hospital. And he was sort of unconscious for the 2+ weeks he was in hospital, and they couldn't feed him because he couldn't swallow properly. So eventually the palliative decision had to be made. So he never really came to enough to have a conversation. But he did. We were taking shifts, so that he was never by himself. And the last time that I was with him was when he passed. But just prior to that, he opened his eyes and he looked off to one corner and he was waving. And he was saying, "Hi, hi," like somebody was waiting there for him. And I'm sobbing like crazy. And then not long after that, he opened his eyes and he looked and he said, "Oh, thank God for you." And that's the last thing my dad said to me. So, am I going to carry that into every little thing that I do?
Yeah.
Absolutely, I will. And I hope that I have. It's hard to find character roles that are really, really mean where you can bring that in. But I do think in every character role, I do think in every evil role, there is a broken person behind that. I think that's the only way you can play evil authentically. If you just play it to go, ooh, let's really gross the audience out, that's not real.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is to find the humanity in and certainly Fagin has a lot of that. But so, it informs all of that stuff. But even if it didn't, Mark, even if I were a widget counter, I'm that much different a person because of having gone through that. Not everybody gets that. And that's why I say it's both a painful and beautiful experience, and one that can't really be replicated any other way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's both really difficult and unfortunate and also really noble reasons that brought you back to the province. I, for one, am really glad you're here. And I really hope that others who are listening get a chance to listen to this podcast, get a chance to meet you and work with you and get to know you as well. And I sure do hope that some of those opportunities to work here in these parts come your way soon, sir.
Yeah, and also thank you for the role you're playing with the SATP. I mean, I had no idea that organization existed, and it's great to see just how active the province is. And you were really an important lifeline, I feel, during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic. We're still in it, obviously, but really when there were literally no performing opportunities. Just the frequency of emails and keeping people in the loop and keeping at least theater in the forefront of our consciousness is really, really important. The financial support that you've offered has been super, super important. So know that you're playing an important part in the theatrical landscape as well. It's not just the people on stage that make the wheels turn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, no, that's appreciate that. And I appreciate the chance to get to know you a little better, sir, and hear your amazing story. And I hope that those who, it seems like, many of us have no shortage of naysayers in our lives. And thanks for showing us the example of someone who used that as incentive, actually, just to keep following their passion and their truth and living a great adventure. And I know it ain't even close to over yet.
No, it's not, because I'm too stubborn to say it's over. But thank you for being brave enough to offer to host this. I sort of had it in my mind that I might make episode 100 sort of a chance to talk about where I'm at in life and how the podcast came to be. And I originally thought, well, it's very self-indulgent and narcissistic of me, but I suppose I could just sit in front of a mic and ramble for a while. And I thought, nah, I don't really want to do that. But I think I casually mentioned to you that I thought of that as one idea, and you didn't even like. I thought, well, if I were to be interviewed, who would it be? And you were the first person I thought of. But I thought, okay, that's really tacky to ask somebody if they'll host you as a guest of your own podcast series. So when I mentioned to you that had been a fleeting idea, but it seems too self-indulgent, and you made that offer, I thought, okay, well, it's meant to be.
Right on.
So thanks. I promise that this will be the only time, dear listeners, as the podcast moves forward, that I will talk this much about myself. So finish that drink that you're having, waiting for me to shut up, and know that it won't happen nearly as this much anymore. And listen to some of the other theater podcasts that the Saskatchewan Association of Theater Professionals have been sponsoring, because we're trying to compile a perspective of the various segments of theater in Saskatchewan from all kinds of different points of view, from directors and actors and writers. So go listen to those. Listen to the whole series. I can now officially say it. Listen to all 100 episodes.
Congratulations for that.
Thanks, Mark. Always good to talk to you. I hope to get to see you, not just mask to mask, face to face again soon.
Amen to that. Take care.
All right, my trout, as they say in the Maritimes. Good talking at you. Thank you.
And you, sir.
Hey, thanks for listening. Music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. SaskScapes can be downloaded from iTunes, Google Play, the SaskScapes app for Android devices, and all of the other major podcasting apps. Stop by and say hi to us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter @SaskScapes. I'd really appreciate it if you stop by iTunes and give us a review or star rating. That boosts the podcast series in the rankings, and more people get to hear your stories. Now, if you know an individual, a group, a town that has a story to tell, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me and I'll let you know what's involved in sponsoring your own episode of SaskScapes. There's no shortage of stories to be told here under the land of the living skies, so until next time...